the saint who was helped by angels, the extraordinary miracles of Saint John Macías. In the heart of 16th century Spain, when the sun had barely risen over the arid fields of Extremadura, a barefoot boy led his sheep through the rocky hills of Ribera del Fresno. His small calloused hands held a worn staff, but his lips murmured prayers that echoed through the lonely vastness. This boy did not know it, but he was destined to become one of the most extraordinary saints in the history of the Church, the one who would be known as the man who freed more than 1 million souls from purgatory. The story of Saint John Macías begins in a time of great voyages and discoveries, when Europe looked to the New World with eyes of ambition and hope. It was an era of violent contrasts, wealth and misery, fervent faith and brutality, saints and sinners walking the same dusty streets. In the Spanish villages, life unfolded to the rhythm of church bells, the cries of merchants, and the religious processions that colored the squares with banners and lit candles. Ribera del Fresno was one of those small villages where everyone knew each other, where news traveled by word of mouth, and where the Catholic faith permeated every aspect of existence. The low, white houses clustered around the parish church like sheep around their shepherd. In the mornings, the smell of freshly baked bread mingled with the aroma of rosemary and thyme that grew wild in the fields. In the afternoon, when the heat became unbearable, the streets emptied, and only the dogs and the most daring children challenged the scorching sun. It was in this setting that John first saw the light of day on March 2nd, 1585. His family was humble, without possessions or titles, but rich in faith and honest work. From his earliest years, something set that boy apart from the others. While the children played noisily in the alleys, John preferred the quiet of the church, where he would remain for long hours in prayer, his small face illuminated by the flickering light of votive candles. The neighbors would comment among themselves with that mix of admiration and suspicion reserved for those who seemed different. That boy had something special, something that did not entirely belong to this world. Tragedy, however, came to John's life all too soon. Still in his childhood, he lost his parents, becoming an orphan in a world that reserved little compassion for the helpless. The pain of loss could have hardened his heart, turned his faith to bitterness. But the exact opposite happened. In his loneliness and destitution, John found refuge in God. His prayers became more intense, his search for the divine more passionate. It was as if, having lost everything on earth, he had discovered treasures in heaven. With no family to support him, John had to work from a very young age. He became a shepherd, a humble and solitary profession that led him to spend entire days in the fields, far from human company. For many, it would have been an arid and monotonous existence. For John, it was a school of contemplation. The fields became his cathedral, the sky his vault painted by divine hands. While the sheep grazed, he prayed. While he walked the stony paths, he meditated on the mysteries of the faith. Those who knew him said that John had the habit of praying the Rosary constantly, his hands moving automatically over the beads while his eyes contemplated the horizon. But there was something more. They said he held conversations with the Virgin Mary, mystical dialogues that lasted for hours, as if she were there, present and visible, walking by his side through the fields of Extremadura. The other shepherds, when they saw him from a distance talking to himself, moving his lips in silence, would shake their heads with a mixture of respect and incomprehension. At night, when he returned to the village with his flock, John did not seek the taverns or the company of other young men. He went directly to the church, where he remained in prayer until the parish priest needed to lock the doors. Even then, he often slept on the doorstep, preferring to be near the Blessed Sacrament than to seek the comfort of a bed. His body rested on the cold stone, but his soul burned with the flames of divine love. The years passed, and John grew in age and in grace. But something troubled his heart. That silent call that all saints hear, that inner voice that cannot be ignored, became increasingly insistent. He knew that God was calling him to something greater, something that would demand a total sacrifice from him. In the long nights of vigil while the world slept, John wrestled with this call, not to refuse it, but to understand its nature and direction. Then came news of the new world, brought by sailors and missionaries who passed through the village. They spoke of immense lands beyond the ocean, of peoples who had never heard the name of Christ, of missionaries who gave their lives to bring the light of the gospel to the darkness of ignorance. They spoke of Peru, that mysterious and distant land where gold shone in the mountains and where thirsty souls awaited the water of salvation. John listened to these stories with a rapidly beating heart. It was there that God was calling him, to those distant lands, to that dangerous and difficult service. The decision was not made impulsively. John prayed, fasted, consulted his confessor. But in the depths of his soul, he already knew the answer. He had to leave. He had to cross the immense and unknown ocean to serve Christ in foreign lands. The farewell to Ribera del Fresno must have been heart-wrenching. John left behind everything he knew, the fields where he had shepherded, the church where he prayed, the few friends he had. He left the land that held the mortal remains of his parents. But he took with him something much more precious, an unshakable faith and a burning love for God and for souls. With a small bundle of belongings and his rosary hanging around his neck, John walked the dusty roads toward the port, where ships regularly departed for the West Indies. The journey across the Atlantic was, in those times, a perilous odyssey. The ships tossed violently on the waves, storms appeared out of nowhere, and diseases spread in the cramped and poorly ventilated holds. Many did not survive the crossing, but John, sustained by his faith and protected, as he firmly believed, by the Virgin Mary, endured all the trials. On nights when the ship seemed about to sink, with waves crashing over the deck and sailors shouting desperate orders, John remained calm, praying his rosary, offering that suffering for the souls in purgatory. Finally, after weeks of sailing, the coast of Peru appeared on the horizon. John stepped onto dry land in a world completely different from the one he had known. The air had a different smell. The sun shone with a different intensity. The people spoke strange languages and wore exotic clothes. Lima, the city of kings, was a center of colonial effervescence, where Spaniards, Indians, and enslaved Africans coexisted in a rigidly stratified society. It was there, in that vibrant and contradictory city, that John found his true home. He presented himself to the Dominicans, the order of preachers founded by St. Dominic, and asked to be admitted as a lay brother. He did not aspire to the priesthood, nor did he seek honors or prominent positions. He wanted only to serve in the deepest humility, doing the simplest and most despised jobs. The convent of Our Lady of the Rosary in Lima was an imposing building, constructed of stone and lime, with cool cloisters where the friars walked in meditation. Its thick walls protected from the intense heat of the day, and its bells marked the rhythm of religious life. The canonical hours, the times of prayer, the calls for communal meals. It was a microcosm of spiritual order and discipline amidst the chaos of the colonial city. John was accepted into the order and received the black and white habit of the Dominicans. His heart overflowed with joy on that day. He was finally where God wanted him, living under a rule that would order his entire existence around prayer and service. He was assigned the role of porter, a position considered minor in the conventual hierarchy, but which John received with profound gratitude. As the porter, John was the first face visitors saw when they arrived at the convent. It was he who opened and closed the heavy wooden door, who received messages, who dealt with merchants and beggars. For many friars, it would have been a tedious and repetitive job. For John, it was an opportunity to practice charity in a direct and concrete way. Every morning, even before the sun rose, John was already at his post. But he did not start his day by opening the door. He began in the chapel, prostrate before the Blessed Sacrament, where he spent hours in deep prayer. His posture was one of complete surrender, his arms outstretched in a cross, his face touching the cold floor. The other friars who passed through the chapel in those pre-dawn hours saw that motionless figure and wondered how a man could remain so long in that position, seemingly oblivious to physical discomfort. After these hours of intense prayer, John would go to the gatehouse, and it was there that His Holiness manifested most visibly. The convent door had become known throughout Lima as the place where the poor and needy could find help. Every day, dozens, sometimes hundreds of people would line up before that door. Beggars covered in sores, mothers with starving children, abandoned old people, the sick with no hope of a cure. John received everyone with the same gentle smile, the same words of consolation. For each one he had bread, when there was any, or at least words of hope and encouragement. But there was something more in his dealings with the poor. They felt that they were not just hungry bodies receiving alms, but precious souls being recognized and valued. John saw Christ himself in every beggar. It was not just charity he practiced, it was adoration. The conversations he had with those simple people were true spiritual direction. A woman who arrived crying, desperate about her son's illness, would leave consoled and strengthened. A man tempted to give up on life would find reasons to continue. A young woman assailed by doubts about her faith would regain her certainty. John had the gift of touching hearts, of finding the right words for every situation. But what most impressed those who knew him was his extraordinary devotion to the souls in purgatory. John firmly believed in the existence of that intermediate state where souls, already saved but not yet completely purified, awaited the beatific vision of God. And he believed with equal firmness that his prayers and sacrifices could alleviate the sufferings of those souls and hasten their entry into heaven. He was not content to pray just a few rosaries for them. His entire life was transformed into a continuous offering for the souls in purgatory. Every task he performed, every alms he distributed, every moment of prayer, everything was offered for those forgotten souls. He fasted rigorously, slept a few hours on a hard plank, mortified his flesh with disciplines and silices, all for the love of those souls who could no longer help themselves. The other friars observed his routine with admiration, and some with concern. Was this obsession with the souls in purgatory healthy? Was John not exaggerating his penances? But they could not deny the fruits of that life of holiness. The peace that emanated from John, his constant joy despite the mortifications, were clear signs that God was with him. Stories about his powers of intercession began to circulate through the city. It was said that people who asked for his prayers for their deceased loved ones had visions or dreams in which the dead appeared radiant, thanking him for their liberation. They said that John could know by divine revelation when a soul was freed from purgatory. In those moments, his face would light up with an indescribable joy, and he would exclaim, "Another one, another soul for heaven." The tradition that formed around his figure claims that throughout his life, John obtained the liberation of 1,400,000 souls from purgatory. It is an impressive, seemingly impossible number, but for those who believe in the power of prayer and the intercession of the saints, there is nothing impossible about it. Every rosary that John prayed, every bead that passed through his calloused fingers was a soul freed. Every sacrifice offered, every moment of suffering accepted with love, rescued souls from the purifying fire. John's fame as a holy man spread quickly through Lima and beyond. People began to seek him out, not just for bread or consolation, but to ask for miracles. And the miracles happened. They were not spectacular prodigies that attracted crowds, but silent signs of God's presence working through his humble servant. A woman came to the convent one morning, carrying in her arms a gravely ill child. The doctors had given up, saying there was nothing more they could do. The fever consumed the small body, and death seemed imminent. The mother, with her eyes swollen from crying, begged John to intercede for her son. John took the child in his arms, made the sign of the cross over him, and prayed silently for a few moments. Then he returned the child to his mother and said simply, "Have faith. God is good." The next day, the fever was completely gone, and the child was playing as if he had never been sick. A merchant who had lost his entire fortune in a shipwreck came to the convent in despair, considering taking his own life. John received him with his usual kindness, listened patiently to his story, and then told him not to lose hope, for God would take care of him. A few days later, the merchant received unexpected news. Part of the cargo he thought was lost had been recovered, and he could restart his business. But John did not seek publicity for these events. On the contrary, he always asked the beneficiaries not to talk about what had happened. "Do not seek me," he would say, "but God and the Virgin Mary. I am just an unworthy instrument." His humility was genuine and profound. The more miracles occurred through him, the more he saw himself as small and insufficient. There were also more mysterious episodes, which bordered on the supernatural more directly. It was said that on days when the amount of bread available at the convent was insufficient to feed all the poor waiting at the door, John would distribute what little he had, and miraculously there was enough for everyone. Like the loaves multiplied by Christ, the bread passed through John's hands and multiplied, feeding dozens of hungry mouths. Other accounts mentioned angelic apparitions. Friars who passed by the gatehouse late at night swore they had seen luminous figures conversing with John, assisting him in his task of distributing food. Were they angels sent by God to help his faithful servant? John never confirmed or denied these stories. He remained silent with his discreet smile, returning to his prayers. There was also the gift of discernment. John seemed able to read the hearts of the people who came to the convent. He knew how to distinguish the truly poor from the pretenders, the sincerely needy from the exploiters. But even when he identified falsehood, he treated the person with charity, offering not just bread for the body, but counsel for the soul. Several people who came to the convent with ill intentions left converted, transformed by their encounter with that holy man. One particularly impressive case involved a man who planned to steal the sacred objects from the convent. He presented himself to John with a false story of need, hoping to gain his trust to later carry out his plan. But when John looked him in the eyes, the man felt as if all his hidden intentions were revealed. John did not accuse him, did not report him. He simply said, "My son, what you are looking for is not here. What you truly need is forgiveness and peace." The thief, deeply shaken, fell to his knees and confessed his plan, asking for forgiveness. John embraced him, prayed with him, and directed him to confession. The man never returned to a life of crime, but behind all these external miracles, the true prodigy was John's inner life. Those who had the privilege of living more intimately with him testified to a union with God that transcended the ordinary. John lived in constant prayer, not just during the formal hours of devotion, but in every moment of the day. While he worked, his lips moved in prayer. While he walked through the convent corridors, his mind was fixed on God. His nights were particularly noteworthy. After completing his duties, and when all the other friars were already asleep, John would return to the chapel. There he would remain until the early hours of the morning in deep contemplation. It was not a prayer of words, it was a silent communion, a fusion of wills, a love that needed no verbal expression. Some friars who observed him during these nocturnal vigils reported extraordinary phenomena. They said that sometimes John was lifted from the floor, levitating in mystical ecstasy. his face transfigured by divine light. Others spoke of an inexplicable fragrance that emanated from him, an aroma of flowers that did not exist in that place. These were external signs of a deep inner reality, the union of the soul with its creator. John also had visions. He saw the Virgin Mary, who appeared to him as a loving mother, encouraging him in his difficulties, thanking him for his prayers for the souls in purgatory. He also saw these same souls in luminous forms ascending to heaven after being freed. Each of these visions renewed his fervor and spurred him on to offer even more sacrifices. But his spirituality was not just one of mystical consolations. John also experienced what the saints call the dark night of the soul. There were periods when God seemed absent, when prayers seemed not to reach heaven, when everything was aridity and desolation. In these moments, John demonstrated the true strength of his faith. He did not lessen his devotions, did not question God. He remained faithful, praying even without feeling consolation, working even without experiencing joy, trusting even in the darkness. This faithfulness in aridity is perhaps the greatest sign of holiness. Anyone can be devout when they feel the presence of God in a consoling way, but to remain faithful when everything seems empty, when prayer seems useless, when the heavens seem made of bronze, that requires heroic faith. And John had it. His relationship with the other friars was marked by this same spiritual depth. He was kind to everyone, never criticized anyone, always found words of encouragement. But he was not an easy man to classify. Some found him excessively austere, too dedicated to penances. Others saw him as a perfect model of religious life. But everyone, without exception, respected him. There were occasions when his superiors ordered him to reduce his mortifications, concerned for his health. John obeyed immediately, without question. Obedience was a fundamental virtue for him. But as soon as the prohibition was lifted, he returned to his penitential practices with the same fervor as before. The years passed, and John continued his humble service at the convent gate. His body, punished by penances and constant work, began to show signs of fatigue. The long hours of vigil, the rigorous fasts, the bodily mortifications had taken their toll. But John did not slow his pace. He knew that time was precious, that every moment was an opportunity to save more souls. In 1645, when John was 60 years old, his health deteriorated significantly. An illness, the details of which the records do not clearly specify, began to consume his strength. The friars, worried, insisted that he rest, that he receive medical treatment. John accepted the illness as another grace from God, another opportunity to offer suffering for the souls in purgatory. During his last months of life, even confined to his bed, John continued his mission of intercession. His rosary never left his hands. His lips moved constantly in prayer, though his voice was too weak to be heard. The friars who visited him left edified by his patience and joy, even in suffering. Many people came to visit him, seeking a final word of advice, a final blessing. John received everyone with his characteristic love. He spoke to them about the importance of perseverance in faith, of trust in God, of devotion to the Virgin Mary, and always, he mentioned the souls in purgatory, asking visitors never to forget to pray for them. As death approached, the supernatural phenomena intensified. His room filled with an inexplicable light. Heavenly fragrances permeated the air. Those who stayed with him swore they heard soft music like angelic chants. John was between two worlds, with one foot still on earth, but his heart already in heaven. On the morning of September 16th, 1645, John asked to receive the last sacraments. The prior of the convent came personally to administer extreme unction and give him Holy Communion. John received the body of Christ with deep devotion, tears streaming down his emaciated face. Then, gathering his last strength, he spoke a few words to the friars surrounding him. "Brothers, do not weep for me. I am going to my Father's house, but continue to pray for the souls in purgatory. They need you." Shortly after, peacefully, like one who simply falls asleep, John gave his soul to God. His face, marked by the suffering of his illness, took on an expression of indescribable peace. The friars fell to their knees around the bed, praying and weeping at the same time. A saint had just departed from this world. The news of John's death spread rapidly through Lima, and something extraordinary happened. An uncountable crowd converged on the convent, wanting to see the body of the holy porter one last time. They were the poor he had fed, the sick he had cured, the people who had received his counsel and consolation. Everyone wanted to pay him a final tribute. The friars had to organize lines to allow people to pass by the body. For 3 days before the burial, thousands of people filed through the convent, and remarkable things happened. People who touched John's body or his habit were instantly cured of their ailments. Devotional objects that were touched to his body acquired, according to the accounts, miraculous powers. A woman blind from birth touched John's face and seconds later began to shout that she could see. A paralyzed man who was carried to the body stood up and walked. Sick children who were brought by their parents recovered instantly. The testimonies of these miracles were carefully recorded by the friars, who already foresaw the possibility of a canonization process. The burial turned into a triumphal procession. All of Lima seemed to take to the streets. The cortege that accompanied John's body to his tomb in the convent church stretched for miles. Rich and poor, Spaniards and Indians, civil and ecclesiastical authorities, all marched together, united in their veneration of the Holy Porter. After the burial, John's tomb became a place of pilgrimage. Daily, dozens of people visited it to pray and ask for his intercession, and the miracles continued to happen. The records of the time are full of accounts: people cured of incurable diseases, miraculous rescues from accidents, sudden conversions, family problems resolved, temptations overcome. One of the most impressive cases involved a ship departing from Lima bound for Spain. A terrible storm threatened to sink the vessel. The sailors, desperate, invoked Saint John Macías. According to the accounts, a figure dressed in the Dominican habit appeared on the ship's mast, calmed the waves, and guided the vessel to safe waters. When they reached the next port, the sailors gave public testimony of the miracle. Another account tells of a woman possessed by demons. No exorcism had been able to free her. Her family took her to John's tomb, and there they prayed with faith. The woman began to scream, saying that the Holy Porter was present and that the demons were being forced to leave. After a few hours of intense prayer, the woman was completely freed and recovered her normal life. Stories like these multiplied over the years. Devotion to Saint John Macías spread not only throughout Peru, but across all of Spanish America and even in Spain. His native town, Ribera del Fresno, took pride in having given the church such a remarkable saint. The Catholic Church, always prudent in these matters, initiated the process of investigating John's virtues. Witnesses were heard, documents were examined, miracles were studied meticulously. The process would be long, as is characteristic of these cases. But the evidence of John's holiness was so overwhelming that few doubted the final outcome. In 1837, almost 200 years after his death, Pope Gregory XVI declared John blessed, allowing his cult in certain regions. It was a first official recognition of his holiness, but the canonization process itself would still take more time. New miracles were attributed to John's intercession over the centuries. In 1960, a Peruvian woman given up by doctors with terminal cancer was cured after a novena to Saint John Macías. The case was rigorously investigated by doctors and theologians. The cure was deemed scientifically inexplicable and attributed to the intercession of the Blessed. This miracle was the one needed for canonization. On September 28, 1975, 330 years after John's death, Pope Paul VI solemnly declared him a saint in St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. It was a moment of great celebration for the Church in Peru and Spain. The humble porter, who had spent his life serving the poor, was now officially recognized as a model of holiness for the entire universal Church. The celebration in Lima was particularly grand. The convent of Our Lady of the Rosary was filled with thousands of faithful. The church where John is buried became an officially recognized shrine. His memory is celebrated on September 18th, close to the date of his death. Today, more than 3.5 centuries after his death, Saint John Macías remains alive in the memory and hearts of the faithful. His story resonates especially in our time, when so many seek authentic models of holiness. John was not a brilliant theologian. He did not write books. He did not found institutions. He was simply a humble porter who loved God with all his heart and his neighbor as himself. His example teaches that holiness is not reserved only for great preachers or extraordinary mystics. It is within reach of all who choose to live each moment in union with God, transforming the simplest gestures into acts of sublime love. John found holiness in everyday tasks, opening and closing a door, distributing bread to the hungry, consoling the afflicted, praying his rosary bead by bead. Devotion to Saint John Macías manifests in various forms around the world. In Peru, especially in Lima, his feast is celebrated with great solemnity. The convent of Our Lady of the Rosary keeps his memory alive, preserving objects that belong to him and documents that recount his life. Pilgrims from all over Latin America visit his tomb, bringing their intentions and petitions. In Ribera del Fresno, his native village in Spain, a church has been dedicated to him. The local inhabitants proudly cherish the memory of the shepherd boy who became a saint. Every year, on the feast of Saint John Macías, the small village organizes processions and religious celebrations that attract visitors from all over the Extremadura region. But it is among the devotees of the souls in purgatory that Saint John Macías finds his most fervent disciples. People who believe in the power of prayer for the deceased turn to him as a special intercessor. After all, if anyone knows the value of praying for the souls awaiting purification, it is the one who dedicated his entire life to this cause. Prayer circles dedicated to Saint John Macías exist in various countries. These groups meet regularly to pray the rosary for the souls in purgatory, following the saint's example. Many report profound spiritual experiences during these prayers, sensations of inexplicable peace, dreams in which deceased people appear to give thanks, signs they interpret as confirmations that their prayers are being answered. The spirituality of Saint John Macías also resonates among those who work with the poor and marginalized. Catholic charitable organizations consider him their special patron. His ability to see Christ in every needy person, to treat every beggar with dignity and respect, offers a powerful model for those who wish to serve the most vulnerable in society. In modern times, when individualism and materialism seem to dominate the culture, John's example offers a radical counterpoint. He lived with the bare minimum, possessing only his religious habit and his rosary, yet he was immensely rich in peace and joy. His happiness did not depend on material possessions, but on his union with God. This message has special power for a society that seeks satisfaction in material goods and fleeting pleasures. There is also a lesser-known, but equally important aspect of Saint John Macías's legacy: his devotion to the Blessed Sacrament. Before being the charitable porter, before being the intercessor for the souls in purgatory, John was an adorer. His hours before the tabernacle were the fuel that powered all his other activities. Without that source of spiritual energy, none of the rest would have been possible. This aspect of his spirituality speaks directly to the Eucharistic adoration movements flourishing in many parts of the Catholic world. Communities that maintain perpetual adoration of the Blessed Sacrament find in Saint John Macías a model and an intercessor. His ability to remain for hours in silent prayer, seemingly doing nothing, but in reality performing the most important work, challenges the activist mentality that sometimes dominates even religious circles. As with many popular saints, a rich collection of pious legends has formed around Saint John Macías. These stories, passed down from generation to generation, mix historical facts with wondrous elements, reflecting the way simple people understand and celebrate holiness. One of the best-known legends tells that on especially difficult days, when the number of poor at the convent door was greater than usual and the available bread was scarce, angels would descend from heaven to help John. They appeared in human form, dressed as friars, and worked alongside him in distributing the food. The poor noticed nothing extraordinary, but the other friars who watched from a distance saw the luminous figures and understood that heaven was assisting their holy brother. According to this tradition, the angels not only helped with the distribution, but also miraculously multiplied the food. John would put his hand into the basket of bread and pull out one loaf, then another, and the basket never emptied. Hundreds of people were fed with what should have been enough for only a few dozen. When the last poor person left satisfied, the angels disappeared as mysteriously as they had arrived, and John returned to his prayers as if nothing extraordinary had happened. Another legend speaks of his ability to predict future events. It was said that John, by divine revelation, knew when dangers threatened the convent or the city. On one occasion, he warned his superiors about an earthquake that was coming, allowing precautions to be taken. On another, he advised a family not to travel on a certain day, saving them from a violent robbery on the road. There are also stories about his ability to be in two places at once. While his body remained at the convent gatehouse in Lima, his spiritual presence was felt in other places. A dying patient in another part of the city received his visit and was cured. A sinner on the brink of despair saw John appear in his room, comforting him and guiding him back to the path of faith. When asked about these episodes, John would just smile and change the subject. One of the most touching legends involves his relationship with the souls in Purgatory. It was said that he had frequent visions of these souls. They appeared to him enveloped in flames, but not flames that destroyed, but rather purified. Their faces expressed both suffering and hope. They spoke with John, asking for his prayers, thanking him for his sacrifices, and revealing to him how many souls had been freed by his intercessions. According to tradition, one particular soul from Purgatory became especially close to John. It was the soul of a priest who had lived a holy life, but who, at the moment of death, had small spiritual debts to pay. This soul appeared regularly to John, informing him of the situation in Purgatory, guiding him on which prayers were most effective, and asking him to intensify his efforts for certain souls who had been waiting for a long time for liberation. When this soul was finally freed and admitted into heaven, it appeared to John one last time, now transfigured in indescribable glory. It thanked him emotionally and promised that from heaven it would intercede for him and for all those who continued the work of praying for the souls in Purgatory. This soul, it was said, became the special guardian angel of all devotees of Saint John Macías. Another pious legend describes an episode in which the devil himself tried to stop John's work. Angered by the fact that so many souls were being snatched from Purgatory and taken to heaven, where they could never again be tempted, Satan decided to confront the holy porter personally. He appeared to him in a terrifying form, threatening him, trying to instill fear in his heart. But John, protected by divine grace and armed with his rosary, showed no fear. He faced the devil with tranquility, making the sign of the cross and invoking the name of Mary. The devil, unable to bear the holiness that emanated from John, fled in despair, leaving a nauseating odor in the air. From that day on, they said, the evil one never again dared to approach John personally, although he continued to try to harm his work in indirect ways. There are also legends about animals recognizing John's holiness. It was said that when he walked through the convent garden, birds would come and land on his shoulders and sing sweetly. Wild dogs that terrorized the neighborhood became tame in his presence. Once, according to tradition, a venomous snake that had entered the convent came to him peacefully and allowed him to carry it outside without causing harm to anyone. These legends, although not all can be historically verified, reveal how the common people understood John's holiness. To them, a man so close to God would naturally have power over nature, over demons, over the future. A man who had freed millions of souls from purgatory would surely be capable of performing any lesser prodigy. It is impossible to speak of Saint John Macías without dedicating special attention to his devotion to the Rosary. This prayer, so simple and yet so profound, was the main instrument of his intercession for the souls in purgatory. His calloused fingers passed countless times over the beads of his rosary, and each Hail Mary he uttered was a plea for the release of a soul. John had a special devotion to the Virgin Mary. He saw her as a merciful mother, the advocate of sinners, the comforter of the afflicted, and the liberator of the souls in purgatory. His mystical conversations with her, which began in the fields of Spain when he was a shepherd, continued and deepened throughout his life. Mary was his closest friend, his counselor, his teacher in the spiritual life. Tradition holds that it was the Virgin Mary herself who revealed to John the extraordinary power of the Rosary to free souls from purgatory. In one of her apparitions, she is said to have told him that each rosary prayed with faith and love had the power to release multiple souls. She encouraged him to pray as many rosaries as possible, assuring him that she herself would present these prayers to her son and that he, through her maternal intercession, could not refuse them. John took this teaching to the extreme. He prayed dozens of rosaries a day. While he worked, while he walked, while he waited, his hands moved the beads and his lips repeated the familiar prayers. It was not a mechanical and empty repetition. Each Hail Mary was pronounced with renewed love. Each mystery was meditated on deeply. Each offering was made with fervent intention. In circles of devotion to the Rosary, Saint John Macías is considered a special patron. Many groups that gather to pray the Rosary collectively invoke his intercession before beginning. They ask him to present their prayers to the Virgin Mary, and that, just as he managed to free countless souls through this prayer, their prayers too might have this power. The way John prayed the Rosary has become a model for many devotees. It was not just about reciting the words quickly to fulfill an obligation. John meditated deeply on each mystery, allowing the scenes from the life of Christ and Mary to penetrate his soul. He prayed slowly, savoring each word, allowing the full meaning of each prayer to reach his heart. There is a devotional practice that arose among the followers of Saint John Macías, praying a rosary, especially for the souls in purgatory, following his method. Before beginning, the saint's intercession is invoked. Then each mystery is offered for specific souls, those most forgotten, those who have been in purgatory the longest, those who have no one to pray for them, those of one's own deceased family members. At the end, a special prayer is made asking Saint John Macías to present this rosary to the Virgin Mary. Testimonies abound regarding the effectiveness of this practice. People report profound spiritual experiences during these special rosaries. Some describe sensations of peace that flood their hearts. Others speak of dreams in which deceased relatives appear to thank them for the prayers. There are even reports of brief visions of radiant souls ascending to heaven, similar to what Saint John Macías himself was said to have experienced. One of the most remarkable aspects of John's holiness was his deep and genuine humility. It was not a false or affected humility, but a real conviction of his own smallness before God. The more miracles occurred through him, the more people sought him out as a saint, the more he saw himself as unworthy and incapable. This humility manifested in practical aspects of his life. John never sought positions of prominence in the convent. He was content to remain the porter, a function considered inferior in the religious hierarchy. When offered more prestigious tasks, he would gently refuse, saying he was not worthy of them and that he preferred to continue serving at the door. His humility was also revealed in how he received praise. When someone thanked him for a miracle or called him a saint, John became visibly uncomfortable. He would immediately deflect attention from himself to God and the Virgin Mary. "I am nothing," he would say. "I am just a useless instrument. All good comes from God, all mercy comes from Mary. Do not thank me, but them." There was an important theological depth to this humility. John genuinely understood that his holiness was not his own merit, but a free gift from God. He knew that, left to his own nature, he would be capable of no good. Every virtue he possessed, every power of intercession he exercised, was all divine grace working through a fragile and cracked vessel of clay. This understanding freed him from any temptation to pride. Even when he performed extraordinary acts of charity or penance, he did not consider himself superior to others. On the contrary, he saw himself as the least among the friars, the most in need of God's mercy. This reversal of perspective, so characteristic of the saints, allowed him to grow constantly in holiness without ever falling into the trap of spiritual vanity. John's humility also manifested in his relationship with the poor. He did not treat them as inferiors who needed his condescending charity. He saw them as equals, or even as superior to himself. After all, he argued, Christ had said that what we do to the least of his brothers, we do to him. Therefore, every beggar was Christ himself in disguise, deserving of all respect and veneration. This revolutionary attitude challenged the rigid social structures of the colonial era. In a deeply stratified society, where social position determined a person's worth, John treated everyone with equal dignity. For him, there was no difference between a viceroy and a slave, between a bishop and a leper. All were beloved children of God. All had immortal souls. All deserved respect. The other friars observed this attitude with a mixture of admiration and incomprehension. How could John remain so calm in the presence of people whose odor was repugnant, whose appearance was frightening, whose diseases were contagious? The answer lay in his humility. He did not see himself as superior to them. He felt no disgust or fear because he identified completely with those sufferers. The life of Saint John Macías teaches another crucial lesson: the power of simplicity. In an age that values complexity, sophistication, and technical knowledge, John's story reminds us that the most important things in life are often the simplest. John had no formal education. He did not study theology at universities, did not read the great spiritual masters in Latin, did not participate in sophisticated intellectual debates. His knowledge of God came from a more direct source, from prayer, from lived experience, from a personal encounter with the divine. This intellectual simplicity, far from being a limitation, was actually an advantage. Without the baggage of complex theories, John could approach God as a child approaches a father, with total trust, without pretensions, without masks. His prayer was not elaborated with fancy words or complex theological concepts. It was simple and direct. Lord, have mercy. Mary, help me. Angels, protect the souls in purgatory. But this simplicity had power because it came from a pure and sincere heart. The Rosary, his main devotion, is the perfect example of this powerful simplicity. It is a prayer that anyone can pray, regardless of their level of education. It does not require deep theological knowledge, nor does it demand special intellectual skill. Children and the illiterate can pray it as effectively as doctors of theology. This democratization of prayer was something John deeply appreciated. His work life also reflected this simplicity. The tasks of a porter were not glamorous or intellectually stimulating. Opening and closing doors, receiving messages, distributing bread to the poor, these were repetitive and mundane activities. But John transformed each of these simple actions into an act of love for God. For him, there was no distinction between the sacred and the profane. Everything was sacred when done with love. This sanctification of the ordinary is a powerful message for the modern world. Many people feel their lives lack meaning because they are not doing extraordinary things. John teaches that greatness is not necessarily in spectacular actions, but in how we live the common moments of each day. A door opened with love is worth more before God than eloquent sermons delivered without charity. John's simplicity also extended to his few material possessions. He owned only his religious habit, his rosary, and a few basic personal items. He accumulated nothing, kept no mementos, was not attached to possessions. This material freedom reflected a deep inner freedom. Unbound by objects, his heart could fly free toward God. More than 3 centuries after his death, Saint John Macías remains relevant and current. His responses to the challenges of his time offer light for the challenges of our time. In a world that is increasingly secularized, materialistic, and individualistic, his life proposes an alternative path. The crisis of meaning that afflicts many modern people finds an answer in John's experience. He lived a life of profound meaning, not because he achieved worldly success or accumulated possessions, but because he discovered his purpose, to love God and serve his neighbor. This discovery gave his existence a clear direction and an unshakable joy, even amidst difficulties. The epidemic of loneliness that characterizes contemporary societies is also challenged by John's example. Although he lived in relative physical isolation as a porter, he was never alone. He maintained constant communion with God, an intimate relationship with the Virgin Mary, a deep connection with the souls in purgatory, and bonds of charity with everyone he met. His relational life was incredibly rich, even without modern communication technologies. The obsessive pursuit of happiness through pleasure and comfort, so characteristic of our time, is questioned by John's life. He voluntarily practiced fasts, mortifications, and renunciations. He slept little, worked hard, spent hours in prayer. By modern standards of well-being, his life would be considered miserable. Yet, witnesses claim he radiated constant joy. His happiness came from a source deeper than physical pleasure. It came from union with God. The frantic activism that characterizes many modern lives also finds correction in John's example. Although he worked diligently serving the poor, he never fell into the trap of empty activism. He knew that action without contemplation becomes sterile. That is why he dedicated long hours to prayer, spiritually recharging before returning to service. This balance between action and contemplation is something many people need to recover. The contemporary obsession with appearances and social recognition is also challenged by John's humility. In an age of social media, where people seek validation through likes and followers, where the projected image matters more than the lived reality, John offers a radical contrast. He lived in obscurity, sought no fame, avoided recognition. His reward came not from human approval, but from communion with God. Contemporary ecclesial movements find a fitting patron in Saint John Macías. Those who work with the homeless see in him a model of charity without condescension. Those who promote Eucharistic adoration find in him an example of persevering prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. Those who pray for the souls in purgatory have in him a powerful intercessor and a spiritual guide. The story of Saint John Macías is ultimately a story about love. Love for God, love for neighbor, love for the souls who can no longer help themselves. This love was not theoretical or sentimental, but practical and sacrificial. John loved with the calloused hands of labor, with the sore knees of prolonged prayer, with the empty stomach of fasting, with a heart overflowing with compassion. His most precious legacy is not the miracles he performed, though these are numerous and impressive. It is not the extraordinary number of souls he freed from purgatory, although this is the most well-known aspect of his sanctity. His deepest legacy is the testimony that holiness is within everyone's reach, that no extraordinary talents or special circumstances are needed to become a saint. John was an ordinary man who made an extraordinary choice to give himself completely to God. This surrender did not happen in a single dramatic moment, but was renewed daily through small choices. Getting up for prayer when the body begged for rest, smiling at the poor when fatigue invited impatience, offering one more rosary when his fingers were sore, accepting one more mortification when nature pleaded for relief. It was through these small daily fidelities that John built an edifice of holiness that still impresses and inspires today. Bead by bead of the rosary, door by door that he opened, loaf by loaf that he distributed, he molded his life in the likeness of Christ. And in doing so, he became a channel of extraordinary graces for countless people. The souls in purgatory, according to pious tradition, never forgot their benefactor. From heaven, where they now enjoy the beatific vision of God, they eternally thank that humble porter who dedicated his life to their liberation. And they continue through his heavenly intercession to help all who turn to Saint John Macías with faith and trust. For those facing difficulties today, Saint John Macías offers hope. His life proves that no situation is desperate when one trusts in God. An orphan, poor, uneducated, living in a foreign land, John could have let himself be defeated by circumstances. Instead, he transformed every obstacle into an opportunity for spiritual growth. For those who feel insignificant or useless, Saint John Macías offers encouragement. He never held positions of power or prestige. He never preached eloquent sermons or wrote theological treatises. He remained in obscurity, doing humble and repetitive work. Yet his influence spread across continents and through centuries. God used his apparent insignificance to accomplish extraordinary works. For those seeking a path to holiness suitable for the modern world, Saint John Macías offers an accessible model. It is not necessary to withdraw to an uninhabited desert or live in perpetual cloister. Holiness can flourish amidst the ordinary occupations of life as long as they are lived with love and offered to God. The humble porter who opened and closed the door of a convent in Lima for decades ended up opening much more important doors, the gates of heaven for millions of souls. And he continues to open these gates for all who call upon him with faith. Saint John Macías remains at his celestial post, interceding for the living and the dead, distributing divine graces with the same generosity with which he distributed bread to the poor. His message resonates through the centuries with crystal clarity. Great human works are not necessary to achieve holiness, but rather radical faithfulness to God and deep love for one's neighbor. This simple but revolutionary message continues to transform lives. Every person who learns his story and is inspired by his example becomes in some way a continuer of his mission. And so, the shepherd boy from Ribera del Fresno, who spoke with the Virgin Mary while leading his sheep through the hills of Spain, eternally fulfills his destiny. He became a shepherd of souls, leading them to the green pastures of paradise. The porter of the convent of Lima continues his duty, no longer opening wooden doors, but opening the heavenly gates for all who invoke him. Saint John Macías, the saint who stole 1,400,000 souls from purgatory, continues his work of mercy. And as long as there are souls who need liberation, hearts that need comfort, sinners who seek conversion, and poor who need aid, his intercession will remain powerful and his memory will remain alive in the Church of Christ. Prayer. O glorious Saint John Macías, humble porter of the convent and powerful intercessor before God, you who dedicated your entire life to prayer for the souls in purgatory and to the service of the neediest, look with mercy upon me who turn to your protection. You who, through the Holy Rosary and countless sacrifices, won the liberation of millions of souls, intercede for me and for all my deceased loved ones who still await purification to enter eternal glory. Present to the Virgin Mary, your mother and friend, my petitions and needs, especially state your request. Obtain for me the grace to live with the same humility, charity, and love for God that marked your holy life. Help me to see Christ in every person I meet, especially in the poorest and most suffering. Teach me to pray the Holy Rosary with fervor and to offer my daily sacrifices for the souls in purgatory. Protect me from the temptations of the evil one and guide me on the path of holiness. Saint John Macías, gatekeeper of heaven, open for me and for all who invoke you the doors of divine mercy. May we, through your intercession, one day behold the face of God in eternal glory. Amen. My prayer, O Lord, our God, in profound gratitude, we lift our hearts to thank you for the gift of life and for the privilege of carrying forth your love through the stories that inspire and transform us. We thank you, Father, for granting us the strength, wisdom, and courage to share the teachings of your gospel through this channel, which has been a beacon of hope and light amidst the adversities of the world. Lord, we recognize that every life is a precious gift, and we are grateful for every moment granted to us to witness and spread your word. May every story told, every message of faith, and every divine teaching reach the hearts that thirst for love, truth, and reconciliation. We thank you for the inspiration that guides us, for the blessings that multiply, and for the opportunity to contribute to the spread of Christianity, bringing the light of your love to those who seek direction and solace. Through these narratives, may we touch lives, strengthen faith, and create a community united in the pursuit of the peace and truth that only you can offer. May your grace continue to enlighten us, and may we be instruments of your mercy and compassion, reflecting the beauty of your love in every word and deed. In the name of Jesus, our Savior, we thank you for allowing us to participate in this sacred mission. Amen. The story of Saint John Macías echoes through the centuries as a beacon of hope amidst the storms of modern life. This simple man, born an orphan and poor in the arid lands of Spain, who worked as a humble shepherd and never sought earthly glories or recognition, became one of the most powerful intercessors in the Catholic Church. His entire life was a continuous offering of love. Love for God manifested in long hours of prayer before the Blessed Sacrament. Love for neighbor demonstrated in tireless charity to the poor and hungry of Lima. And love for the souls in purgatory expressed in countless rosaries prayed and sacrifices offered for their liberation. The legacy of Saint John Macías transcends the extraordinary miracles he performed, the inexplicable cures he wrought, or even the impressive number of 1,400,000 souls he freed from purgatory. His true gift to humanity is the living testimony that holiness is not reserved for brilliant intellectuals, eloquent preachers, or those who hold prominent positions in society. Holiness flourishes in simplicity, in humility, in the faithful fulfillment of daily duties transformed into acts of divine love. John proved that a convent porter, someone whose job was simply to open and close doors, could open the very gates of heaven for millions of souls. In times when so many people seek happiness in material possessions, social recognition, and fleeting pleasures, the life of Saint John Macías offers a radically different path. He owned only a religious habit and a rosary, yet he was infinitely rich in peace and joy. He had no followers on social media, yet his influence spread across continents. He wrote no books, yet his life became a living gospel that continues to convert hearts. He lived in the obscurity of a convent gatehouse, yet his light shines to this day, illuminating the path of countless faithful who seek a life of meaning and purpose. The special devotion of Saint John Macías for the souls in purgatory deeply touches the hearts of all who believe in the communion of saints and the power of intercession. His life reminds us that charity is not restricted to the living, but also extends to those who have already departed this life and await final purification. Every rosary prayed with love, every sacrifice offered with generosity, every prayer lifted with faith has the power to alleviate the sufferings of souls and hasten their entry into eternal glory. John teaches that we should never forget our dead, that we should never cease to pray for those who can no longer help themselves. For those facing financial difficulties, Saint John Macías offers hope by showing how material poverty does not prevent spiritual wealth. For those who feel lonely and abandoned, he demonstrates how communion with God fills all the voids of the heart. For those who bear the weight of humble and repetitive jobs, he reveals how these tasks can become paths to sanctification when performed with love. For those who doubt their own worth and importance, he proclaims that in the eyes of God, there are no insignificant people, only precious souls created in his image and likeness. The Holy Rosary, which John constantly held in his calloused hands, remains his most precious heritage. This simple prayer, accessible to all regardless of education or social status, was the spiritual weapon through which he won extraordinary victories in the unseen world. Each Hail Mary uttered by his lips was a battle won. Each mystery meditated was a fortress conquered. Each completed rosary was a soul freed from the purifying flames. And he continues to teach from high in heaven that this same spiritual weapon is available to all who wish to participate in his mission of mercy. The life of Saint John Macías is an urgent invitation for every person to rediscover the true meaning of human existence. We did not come into this world to accumulate goods we cannot take with us, nor to seek glories that fade like mist in the sun. We came to know, love, and serve God, and through this relationship to find true joy and lasting peace. We came to love our neighbor as ourselves, especially the poorest and most vulnerable in whom Christ hides. We came to live in such a way that our time on earth leaves the world a little better, more compassionate, closer to the kingdom of God. If this story has touched your heart, if the life of this humble saint has inspired your soul, do not keep this message to yourself. Subscribe to the Sacred Stories channel to continue discovering edifying testimonies of men and women who transformed the world through their heroic faith. Share this video with friends and family who need to know the power of prayer and the intercession of the saints. Leave a like so that more people can be reached by these stories that build faith and renew hope. Every share is a form of evangelization. Every like is a sign of gratitude for the gifts God grants through his saints. And now, a question for reflection and interaction. Have you ever had an experience of praying for the souls in purgatory, or a testimony of intercession you would like to share in the comments? Your stories can inspire and strengthen the faith of the entire community. Be sure to also watch one of the videos that appear up here, chosen especially for you, to continue your journey of discovering the wonders that God works through his saints. May Saint John Macías intercede for us all and open the gates of heaven for us.